everyone, and welcome. This is a great session for beginners. We have lots of tips and tricks for more advanced users as well. I'm really thinking of it as a comprehensive lay of the land of what the Census Bureau offers. A little bit of a focus on the things most likely to use, but really expansive list of topics to cover. So I'm going to kick us off this morning, and then Carol Miller, Data Dissemination Specialist from the U.S. Census Bureau, will take on part 2 of this session. Data from the United States Census Bureau is our topic this morning, but data from the United States Census Bureau is far from one thing. It's really far from one thing. There are different products, there are different users, there are different schedules, and there are different access methods. And in fact, those access methods are changing all the time. Data.census.gov was released just a couple of years ago, and I can see in real time sometimes when I'm on there how it's changing and adapting to meet the needs of its users. So it's a really exciting product, but things are changing constantly in this world. So what ties this all together? What makes us so confident at the University of Nebraska at Omaha to share this data, to be part of what's called the State Data Center Network from the United States Census Bureau? This is folks from across the United States, several organizations within one state, in fact, that care about census data and want to share census data. So what makes us so sure that this is the right data to use? What ties it all together? And I think without a doubt, the answer is you can trust it. This is actually the State Data Center Conference this summer. I had the pleasure of attending. They just brought this back in person as well in Washington, D.C. And this is a far out picture of the United States Census Bureau Director, Robert Santos, talking about this. And this is the exact question I posed to him. I said, after his little presentation, I said, one of the questions we get is, why should we trust the Census Bureau? What do we know about the data that's different than everything else? And I'm going to talk about some of those technical details, but he really spoke about the people of the United States Census Bureau and how much they care about providing quality data about people and the economy. And you can see their mission statement right there. Truly, there is no other resource like it. So I want to talk about 3 products. These are the 3 most common products we use as the State Data Center. There are actually 137 products from the United States Census Bureau. We are going to cover, between Carol and I, several of those, but nowhere near all of them. But these are the 3 we most commonly use. And these are the 3 that when folks email, I'm usually suggesting back to them. So the first one is the decennial census. And I've bold the word census. This is not a survey. This is not a statistical product, right? This is a count of every person in the United States every 10 years. This is the number, right? These are the official numbers, not statistics, counts, estimates of every person in the United States. This is a copy of the Census Bureau form. The decennial census was 7 questions. It was 7 questions about every person in the household, so it's a little longer than 7 questions. But to give you a real clear sense, this is just a couple questions to be able to, sorry, screen issue. There we go. Just a couple questions for every person in the household, because the point is not this rich data source. This point is to get that official count. 2020, United States population, that's the number, right? There is no other number. There is no other resource to count every person in the United States every 10 years. So this data is really interesting because it is that official count, but it doesn't have that rich socio-demographic information. So why would you use this source? You need that precise total population count for race, ethnicity, age, and household composition. That's really all you're going to get, and you need that official count. For instance, it's required in legislation, redistricting, federal programming. Millions of dollars every year are given to each state based on this official count, federal programming. A lot of times we see grant programs that ask something like, that we get grant programs that would like that information they need us to use that official count. I was just talking with someone from the Nebraska Department of Economic Development the other day, and a piece of legislation said they have to use that number, right? So they could not use the population estimates program, which I'm going to talk about next. Official counts. Another reason to use it is you're really interested in those official counts for a very small geography, and I mentioned two here. These are statistical geographies. These are things that the Census Bureau creates. They create them in a very official way for very official purposes, but they are very small units of geography, so they're not going to release a lot of data at that level. They are going to release those counts. Block group, essentially, like, think of a block as your block in your neighborhood. Think of a block group as a group of those blocks up to a census tract. They really try to think about these, but they're about 4,000 in population. Here in the urban areas, a census tract. In the rural areas, many census tracts, many of our counties don't reach 4,000 in population, so they'll go to the county level, or a census tract will be the same as a county. So census tract population varies, but in an urban area like I am right now in Omaha, it will be much smaller. I'll talk a little bit more about geography, and part 2 will have a lot more about geography with Allison Schafer from the Census Bureau. The other reason you might use it is you're studying change across decades, right? You're not interested in what happened last year, but you're interested in what happened 10 years ago or more. So for instance, one way to access some Census Bureau data for Nebraska about the decennial census is a website that we have created for you. All of the links in this PowerPoint are live. They should transfer over when you're on the website. So please use this PowerPoint as a resource and click on all these different things to learn more. So for instance, we made some 2020 census data available on a website. The Census Bureau has done a great job putting some visualizations together on topics. So for instance, they have a dashboard on race and ethnicity from the decennial census counts. It's by county, it's by state, you see change over time. It's really great. So you can just pull numbers from there versus having to go into raw data. And then I also suggest how to access it from data.census.gov. That is the main United States Census Bureau data portal. It is not the only data portal, though. Talk more about that. There are different ways to use this portal. There's like a topical search bar. Sometimes that's really helpful. If you're trying to access decennial census counts, I really suggest going into the advanced and then picking the actual survey, not a survey, the census, the decennial census, and then they're going to release data, total population data at this block group level. So it's kind of a quick way to get to the data you want. Decennial census. So here's how we've used the decennial census. This is the 2020 census counts by county, official counts. Nebraska total number, 1,961,504. If someone says to me, what's the official population of Nebraska? I'm going to say this number. And you can see information by county. For all the sources, I'm going to show this map. So if you want to pick a county you're really interested in to see how the different sources report population, go ahead and pick one now. Just to give you a little bit more about geography, I mentioned block group and census tract. These are very small levels of detail. Because these are the official counts, they are going to release limited total population mainly and racial and ethnic groups by block group and census tract. So here, this is Douglas County, outlined in gray, and then the red is census tracts. The reason I really point out that these are statistical geographies, very few people know what census tract they live in. It is not a meaningful geography like a political geography is, county, city, things like that. But it is useful when you are looking at these small geographies or interested in building a particular geography. So here you can see I've chosen block group 1 in a census tract, and that is the total population. You can recreate this map. It's actually linked there, and you can recreate this map for every county. Now, They are not going to release a lot of information at this small level of detail because of privacy concerns. And that is another reason why you can trust the Census Bureau. They go through great effort to make sure they're not making folks identifiable. Someone asked, do census block group boundaries serve as boundaries for voting precincts? Absolutely not. Voting precincts are another statistical or another political geography. So by political, I mean we created them, not statistics created them, or a meaningful statistical group. We helped with over 30 redistricting projects here, working mostly with really difficult boundaries. So smaller areas, but educational service units, for instance, that cross county, city, school district, right? Like they bring in all the political geographies. And then their voting precincts are something else they created. Now right, like if I could tell people what to do, that would be an interesting way to set up voting precincts to kind of help to clarify this. But in order to do redistricting, what we really had to do is go to that block level and build up from there with those total population counts. You really couldn't go to anything like a census tract because it already cuts so many different boundaries. So great question, and get those questions in. Sorry. Okay. So those are census tracts. I'll talk a little bit more about those as well. Here's another project we've done with the decennial census counts. This is just looking, right, I said decades of change. So looking at metro versus non-metro, which is a geography that we decided to use, right? It doesn't normally just give us data by metro and non-metro. We thought that was an interesting way to look at Nebraska, and then we create that geography. We mostly built off counties here because metros can take into account partial counties or whole counties. And then looked at change over time. On our 2020 website, we have data going back to 1980 and maybe a little farther back available for you by decade, by county. So you can just go grab it from there. You can also grab it from the Census Bureau. That's about all we do with the decennial census. It's unbelievably important. It has huge political ramifications because it is what we use to create legislative districts and all sorts of districts as part of redistricting. So it's really important that way. It's really important related to federal programming. They use those numbers for the whole decade for allocation amounts. And then, like I said, there's every once in a while, something wants you to use that, so you'll need those numbers. But other than that, I really don't use it because it doesn't provide me those rich socioeconomic variables that folks usually come to us for. Population estimates. So here I've highlighted the word estimates. Unlike the decennial census, which is a count of every person, this is a statistical estimating program. So if you think of the Census Bureau being out knocking on doors at the decennial census, here I like to think of them as in their office, heads down, crunching numbers. It's not a survey or a census at all. It is a statistical estimating process. And this is actually the equation they use. Population base, so they recenter on 2020 data, plus births, they get administrative records to estimate the number of births, minus deaths, they get that from administrative records, plus migration, administrative records, equals the population estimate. So that is the equation. This data is actually released on a website. And you click around and you get an Excel file. And I think that makes people feel really uncomfortable because that's not how most Census Bureau data comes. But it is really important and really useful data. We use it a lot. I'll talk about that more, but it is a very different access system. And this was actually a big question at that State Data Center conference in DC that I attended this summer. And it's because of how they load the data. It's very different than the other programs like a survey. So they haven't put it all into data.census.gov. Although some things are starting to come through that way, I still send people to the website. These should all be clickable links as well. So why use the population estimates? Essentially, the point of this program is to estimate the population, that same data you would get from the decennial census, in between census, right? So it's hard to wait, right? In 2029, we're not going to want to use 2020 data necessarily. So the population estimates program is going to provide just the data that the decennial census would. It's a little bit different, but essentially that data, but it's going to provide it annually. And it's very timely. So right now, 2022 is currently available. So it's going to be the more timely estimate. And that's why, because they don't have to wait on people necessarily to answer their surveys or provide the official count. They can just statistically estimate this thing based on data that they have available. So you're going to use this if you need timely estimates of the population by race, ethnicity, gender, and age. We'll have a panelist later that is using the population estimates at DHHS as a denominator in a lot of their information. This is also available to explore components of population change, natural change, migration, those births and deaths numbers. And I have them here. So 2021 to 2022, we had natural change was 5,105. So there were 24,000 about births, 19,000 deaths. So we are positive for natural change. We're actually the 14th highest in the country for natural change. So we are growing mostly from Nebraskans growing Nebraska. So, right, one of the only ways to get that data without working with administrative records yourself, which can be very difficult. This is going to be largely available for those political geographies I've mentioned, county, city. Here you can see metro and micropolitan statistical area. So they want you to have data at a lot of different levels, but it's going to be things you're used to getting. They're not going to release it at that small level. It's because it's a statistical estimating program. They're not good at that small level. They're better in big chunks. Right. When someone dies, they don't normally publish the address with that information, something like that. And you're trying to study contemporary change. So you're looking at 2021 to 2022, for instance. These are the links to that program. This will give you a little bit about the program, and then this will give you actually to this page where you can download some of the data yourself. This is a 2022 population estimates, total population estimates by county. So if you were looking back to your decennial census, now this is a different year. This is 2022. It does center on 2020, the decennial census counts, right? It uses that as its population base to come up with this number. So of course it's a little different than the decennial census. It's not way off, but it's a little different, as you would expect natural change and migration to change over the 2 years, 2021 and now 2022. But if you look at some of the county details, it's probably getting you pretty close to those numbers, if not a little more optimal. This is a map I show or graph I show all the time in my research, out talking to people about how Nebraska is changing. We're always interested in migration patterns. So here you can see positive for net international migration, negative for net domestic migration. Someone asked, where can I find the 2022 population estimate? You're going to click on here, and then you kind of have to find the one you want. But if you just want the 2022 population estimate, well, one, I gave it to you right here. If you want it, I can send you this. But if you go to here, you're going to get to a page that looks like this. You're going to find state or county, and then you're going to look for, it'll kind of have a click down. You'll choose Nebraska, and then that's going to include 2020, 2021, and 2022 in that file. But that's where you get it. Again, a lot of people really wonder like why they do it this way, and they explained it's because of the data. It doesn't work like the other data, so it's harder to put in that system. But it is very trustworthy. It is very accurate, and it's the best we have to precisely estimate total population in between decennial censuses. Yes, we will be sending slides. We will be posting slides to the website that you all received. Okay, American Community Survey. If you're talking to us, seeing us out, looking on our website, we're probably using American Community Survey data. American Community Survey is a much larger survey than the decennial census. It is a much larger survey than any survey you'll find anywhere. There are 3.5 million respondents to the American Community Survey annually. Just for an example, and I'm not picking on them at all, the Pew Research Center. Pew Research Center puts out great polling data. It puts out really interesting sort of public opinion data, but you cannot use it to estimate the kind of things the American Community Surveys estimates. And look at that number. So 3.5 million respondents annually to the American Community Survey. A standard Pew Research Center poll is 1,500 total people. A standard Pew Research Center poll is 1,500 people, and I actually linked that source. So it can be up to 10,000, but that's still nowhere near 3.5 million. So when I say you can trust the Census Bureau, there's a lot of reasons, but that's a really good one. No polling, no survey is going to estimate population of the United States anywhere near what the American Community Survey can do. And that's their job, and they take it really seriously. They use all the best practices to make sure these numbers are meaningful. But what I would say is, if you're trying to just estimate total population, you have the population estimates program. If you're close to the decennial census, you can use the official count. The reason you go to the American Community Survey is you want that socio-demographic information. You want to characterize the population, not just count them. Now, their numbers are good for the counts, but where the numbers are especially good is when you're trying to explain proportions of the population that fall into different groups. Ancestry, citizenship, disability, educational attainment, fertility, how grandparents in the home, multi-generational households, if grandparents are taking care of children, language, marital status, migration, school enrollment, veterans age, ethnicity, race, relationships within the household, like I was saying about grandparents, sex, type of work or commuting, employment status, food stamps, health insurance, income, right? Like I'm not done reading the list of topics. I've gone ahead and given you lists, links to these demographic profiles. These are 4 tables that are going to be available for a lot of different geographies in Nebraska and are going to give you a really good lay of the land. Okay, they're going to show you all of that. If you're trying, if you're trying to figure out what can I have, what is available, this is a good place to start. There are more detailed tables, but they're not going to be available for every geography. But this will give you a really good characterization of what is made available. I also highly suggest looking at the survey itself. So this link will bring you to a PDF of the survey. You can see this document in full. Like I said, it can take up to 40 minutes to complete. Like it is lengthy, but just by looking at the survey, you'll get a really good idea of what kind of data you can get. Same for these links. Just to give you that sort of overview, social, economic, housing, and demographics. If you need to look at these population groups, right? So I want to know, for instance, in this, we'll look at the number of women that are self-employed, right? Or I want to know poverty by age groups. This is where you're going to go, right? When you're really trying to understand who and what is happening to people within the state. So these will give you that overview, but then there are more detailed tables that will look at specific topics like those I read out in a little bit more detail. I'll show some examples. There's even the possibility with this survey to use microdata. This is 1% of all of those response, 1% of 3.5 million respondents annually, where you're looking at individual records. It does not have a lot of identifying information, and they're very careful about what they release by geography. So it tends to be chunkier geographies than we're used to seeing with American Community Survey data, but it is a really exciting option. I'll talk about that a little bit more. This survey is really good for political geographies, legislative districts, counties, cities, zip code, school district, right? Things that we use to group society in a meaningful way. They're going to try to report as much data at those levels as possible so you can describe these attributes of your community. And if you're studying contemporary change, On the data.census.gov portal, you can look at American Community Survey going back to 2010. So that's pretty good. If you're going back decades, you're probably going to use the decennial census. You also can't be pressed for the most timely information. Right now, 2021 is the most recent year available. Talk a little bit about that. A couple ways to access. We have essentially our own version of a quick facts, which comes from the Census Bureau. Carol will talk about that a little bit more. But you can see data by county, you can see a map, so you can compare variables by county, but a lot of the data for here already organized for you for Nebraska. Data.census.gov, I really suggest a topical search for American Community Survey to get you started, or click into these, start thinking about what you want, start thinking about the terms, right? They use specific terms to describe attributes of life that maybe we're not used to, or like the survey will help with a little bit of that as well. But that will help you sort of refine your topical search and go in. So slightly different way than I suggested to accessing decennial census data. It's just my experience using it. They have also released data for the current legislative districts and congressional districts. In the next release of the American Community Survey, this data will be available on data.census.gov, but because of redistricting and those changing at some point during 2020, they went ahead and released them in a slightly different way. You actually have to download files again, kind of like that population estimates program. But if you want the most recent data, there it is. So here's our population by county map. You see Nebraska a little bit higher. Again, it's for 2021, and they don't recenter on 2020 until 2022 for this survey product. So they're just kind of rolling that data along, but they will recenter a little bit. If you have a county, you can go ahead and pick it out. Down here, you'll notice I mentioned 5-year estimates. So I want to talk about 1 year versus 5-year estimates. 1 year is 12 months of data. So when the American Community Survey is out, like I said, 3.5 million respondents annually. So they are asking people monthly this information. So it's not a point in time survey, it's throughout the year. So they're going to release those 1 year estimates as soon as possible. So 2022 1 year release is actually September 14th. So when you come back to part 2, we're going to be presenting data from the 1 year estimates. So what are the 1 year estimates compared to what you'll often see is the 5-year estimates? 5-year are 60 months of data. It's not data for the past, right? It's not data for 2018 being reported in 2022. It's essentially using that data to smooth the trends, the outliers. Survey data is bumpy, right? People don't change that often, but data does, right? So what they were trying to do is just make sure there's no outliers, there's no spikes. They're pooling more data to be really confident about where they are. And that's what surveys do. They take a sample, they ask 3.5 million of the 333 million that are here, some information, and then they use that to estimate to the total population what those numbers are. So the 5-year data just gives them more data to smooth out those trends. It's still for 2022. The 5-year release is going to be a little bit less timely. It's going to be out in December 7th. So if you need the newest data, go for it. 1 year is great for large geographies, but it is going to have a larger margin of error. Again, when we do a survey, sample to the population, so we're not precise like the decennial census, but we're sure it's in a range. So here you can see this is the demographic profile, ACS demographic and housing estimates, a great place to start if you're trying to learn more. We're for Nebraska, and here you can see the 1 year. This is from the data.census.gov portal. I've chosen the geography Nebraska. So this is the very top of this table. You'll see total population. It's good for estimating total population. It's really good, but I tend to use it for other things. But I just wanted to show you here margin of error. So in the 1 year, they're saying plus or minus, they're not doing it for the estimate, they're just doing it for these subgroups, plus or minus 2,600. So male, female tend to be 50% either way, but they're saying this estimate is within 2,000 or so of that number. This is the same table, DPO5, but I've chosen it for 5-year geography Nebraska, and you can see the much smaller margin of error. More data, smaller margin of error. So they're saying plus or minus 731. So it's really good at estimating this data. If you can use the 5-year, I really suggest it. If you are looking at any subgroups or smaller geographies like a county, I really, really suggest the 5-year. If you need 1 year, because you're doing some big chunky things and it's important to get that timely information, it's okay at the state level especially. But the smaller geographies, or as you're looking at smaller and smaller groups, as I'm going to show you in a minute, we're going to try to use the 5-year. So for instance, like I said, if you're seeing data from us, it's probably from the American Community Survey. We did an infographic on poverty in Nebraska this year. And so this is just one of many pictures. You can see it's for the 5-year estimates, and we're looking at poverty, a grouping of the population, and then we're looking at it by these different age groups, under 5, under 18, and 65 and over. And we're looking at it over time, like I said, with the ACS very easily on data.census.gov. You can go back to 2010. I chose 2015 here just to get a little bit of a trend line. So looking at subgroups within a geography and even change over time. We just released an infographic on the foreign-born population of Nebraska. I always think it's important to point out foreign-born persons have a higher labor force participation rate than the native Nebraska population. So I wanted to look at Nebraska, but a subgroup, the foreign-born compared to native. That's actually available on a really standard table at that geography, Nebraska. And so you can see the full infographic there, but giving you a really good sense of what you can do on those subgroup populations. This is a project we did related to LB 1024, which was a bill to provide ARPA funding to North and South Omaha for a range of different projects. And we wanted to characterize that community. North Omaha is a geography we here in Omaha tend to kind of know or think about as distinct, but it is not a distinct geography within the United States Census Bureau. It's a neighborhood, essentially, and they're not going to estimate data for neighborhoods. Because it was in Douglas County, and Douglas County is highly populated, I was able to get data by census tract, and then I was able to summarize across several census tracts. I think it was 18 census tracts to create North Omaha. Same thing as pooled across several census tracts to get South Omaha, and then I looked at the balance of Douglas County. And we were able to report data there with some confidence, right? Because this American Community Survey data is so rich. There's a lot more. I mean, this is several pages of data at these different geographies. What I want to point out, actually right here, 26 of those tracts are North Omaha, 17 tracts are South Omaha, and 120 tracts were the balance of Douglas County. This is not possible necessarily for neighborhoods in less populous areas of the state, less populous areas anywhere. And that's because fewer people, less data, they're not going to report that data at that smaller geography. They don't have the confidence they do in the other data. Another thing about the United States Census Bureau, they're not going to release data you can't trust. They're not going to release data and numbers that they don't think are accurate, that have those big margins of error. So you won't be able to get the same level of detail that I created here at some of the smaller geographies. Most of it would be available at the county level, though. Not all of it, though. And these are common issues we hear about census geography. How do I get statistics for my neighborhood? If your neighborhood is large enough to build up from the census tract level, we'll let you know. But it's really very few communities that you can do that. You may be able to see place like a city, metro, micropolitan area. There are some other things, but not everything is going to have the level of detail that we could provide here. And that's Census Bureau data. And that goes right to the second question we hear all the time. Why can't I see this very detailed table? Like I said, there's these overview tables that are available for county, but there are some more detailed tables. They're not going to be available for every county because of small population numbers and protection and confidentiality. And then we also get, I need rural data, I need urban data, I need my region. Census Bureau is going to release data at a lot of different levels, but a lot of time you're going to have to build based on what you want. And I'll talk a little bit about that in part 2. Here's something we just released. We were looking at remote work in Nebraska, how many people report working from home, and then we also look at if they live in another state and report working for Nebraska. To be able to do this, we had to use microdata. So this first map, this table is released. It's about commuting patterns, and there is a question about, did you work from home? So able to do that at the state level. But as we go deeper and deeper in the data, there comes a point where, like, Census Bureau doesn't know why you need that data, so they didn't make a standard table in data.census.gov. There are 2 options for microdata. The data.census.gov has its own microdata site. There's also this IPUMS site from the University of Minnesota. It is really helpful if you're going to use a statistical program to analyze the data, versus the microdata site is right on a website. IPUMS has one too that's right on a website, but it's not as good as data.census.gov. This is an unbelievably valuable tool for answering groups about subpopulations. It is not an easy to use tool. Even the online program, you really have to understand what you're looking at. Different census questions, how they're asked, what geographies are available, especially if you can recode data. Let's say you need certain groups for another age group or something like that. You can make it, but it's going to have larger margins of error because you're looking at smaller data. So you can't really trust the estimates as much as you can trust percentages. Yeah, there's all sorts of tips and tricks. I took a great class from the Census Bureau on their microdata site. So I would suggest that if that's something you want to do. Same with the IPUM site. There's lots of resources to learn more about that, but you do need to be a more advanced user. If people are interested in that, let us know. Okay. So I want to play a little game pretty quick so I can turn this over to the Census Bureau. Game. My idea of a game probably different than other people's. But which data source? So I presented on the decennial census, population estimates, and American Community Survey. So based on these questions, and these are active questions in our UNO CPAR at unomaha.edu email box, questions that people ask us, and we say, hey, here's the data to answer that. So if you received what, and so you can type this into the chat to everyone if you want to show off your census data knowledge. What is the median population for all communities in Nebraska? And this one interesting if you want to guess the geography that you might use to answer that one as well. What was the fastest growing county in the last decade? Or what was the fastest growing county 2021 to 2022? How does Nebraska rank for the percent of population that is housing cost burden, which is 30% of income or more? 30% of income or more is spent on housing costs. How many women own businesses in Omaha? And what is this disabled population in Western Nebraska? You might want to guess geography there. We don't have too much time, and I don't see anybody going into the chat, but just guess the survey and maybe the geography if you want to. Well, don't worry. We gave you the answers on this next slide. And this is how we send people a lot of data. We just send them the link where we access that information. Census Bureau data is not private. They want people to have it. Said, need some tips and tricks to get in there, but we've gone ahead and linked the table where I've answered these questions. So median population for all communities in Nebraska is 288. That's a very small number. That includes Omaha and Lincoln, for instance. So we have lots of small communities. And for communities, I use the geography place. And the survey there was the American Community Survey. Could I have done it from the population estimates? Absolutely. Could have done the same thing. Since a little easier to download some data from data.census.gov, I went with it. What was the fastest growing county in the last decade? Here I've gone ahead and linked our site because we show that 2010 and 2020 and change over time. It is Sarpy County. If you were looking 2021 to 2022, you would definitely want to use the population estimates program, and it is also Sarpy County. How does Nebraska rank for the percent of population that is housing burdened? You remember from the ACS, there is a housing table. This is data they Actively report, super helpful. They're looking at two different variables. How much do you spend on housing and how much do you spend on income? Slap those two together and they report that data. And you can see that for county too. Here, I did it for states and went ahead and ranked us 48th in the country for housing burden of those with a mortgage, 49th in the country for renter burden. It's actually not very expensive at all. Well, compared to other states. How many female-owned businesses in Omaha? This is an American Community Survey question. I chose metropolitan area for Omaha versus city. Could have used both. They would have released the data. 5,808, 32% of self-employed persons are women. And what's the disabled population in Western Nebraska? This was a question that came in. I sent them the data by county and then suggested that they tell me what counties are Western to them. And then we could sum. There's also a really interesting product called the Public Use Micro Data Areas, PUMAs. And again, like a census tract, it is a statistical area that the Census Bureau creates. It's thoughtful in it, but that one has a Northwest and Central Nebraska, and that can be a really good regional grouping that you can get data for. Okay, this is a list of some other products we use as the state data center very commonly. Total, the census reports 139 products. They have a list of all their surveys and programs. But these are some of the other ones we use quite a bit. Okay. That was a lot of information. We are going to make everything available to you all, a recording of this, and all of these links are going to be live on the website after the presentation today. But with that, I want to turn it over to my great friend, Carol Miller.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Very, very good. Thank you
Excellent.
so much.
Nice presentation today.
Oh my gosh, it was so much. I tried to.
Yes, you went over quite a bit of information. That's great.
That's why we are providing those links so folks can take a closer look. So Carol is the data dissemination specialist for the United States Census Bureau. She is our data dissemination specialist. She's actually in Colorado, but she's assigned to our region. And she was here this summer. We hung out, and then we hung out in DC too. Hey, so much, Carol. I love it. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Carol is going to talk about some other ways, other census data products, as well as other access tools that might make it a little easier than some of the stuff I showed.
Exactly. Right? Thanks so much. And I love the way you applied the data to actual uses for you and your community and the questions that you're asked. And it was really well done. My part of this is going to be a little more hands-on demonstration. So I'm going to ask your audience to kind of play along with me, and let's dig into some of those tools and see what we've got. Okay. I am going to share my PowerPoint with you as well. So, and we'll flip back and forth between the slides and the live demo. So, thank you so much for being a part of this morning. Thanks for sharing your morning with us. I hope you can take back a couple tidbits and go practice using some of these tools. I'm with the Census Bureau. I joined in 2008 with the 2010 decennial, and I've spent the last 9 years or so with data dissemination and training. What we do is we bring these tools to you in a variety of ways. Either I can come and visit you, I can do a live demonstration like this over the airwaves if we don't have any travel dollars available. We have data gems and webinars and courses that you can take on our Census Academy site. Feel free also to contact us via email at census.askdata@census.gov. And also you can make a phone call, and there are live people there waiting to answer your call at 844-275-3282. First of all, thanks for sharing your morning with us. And we're going to dive into a couple of tools, My Community Explorer and Community Resilience Estimates. They're kind of hand in hand. They talk about how communities adapt to different things that happen around them and some of the circumstances that may prevent adaptability. Okay. And then I'm going to go through a whole string of things that may interest you from the Census Bureau, and I can help you on any of those tools, those other tools, and those other announcements as well. So, all righty, let's just dive right into my Community Explorer. This is an interactive map-based tool that highlights demographic and socioeconomic data measuring inequality. It was designed to help users identify underserved communities as directed by the President's Executive Order 13985 on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the workforce. It's useful for ensuring equitable access to things like transportation and healthcare, understanding the area's potential impact by natural events. Okay. Some of those things include county profiles, socioeconomic characteristics, race, ethnicity, business profiles. And it reflects things like typhoons and hurricanes, which are a big problem in Nebraska, but wildfires, air quality indexes, and heat indexes. Okay. So when you pull up the My Community Explorer, it'll take you to an interactive map to begin with. Okay, so I am going to just toggle on over there. If you want to open a new window and hop on over to census.gov, and we're going to hover. There's major links here. You can just hover over data and maps, and we're going to go to data equity tools. This is all started a lot having to do with COVID-19, because we all went Zoom and a lot of people didn't have connectivity to get there. So they were kind of locked out. So we're going to scroll down just a little bit to My Community Explorer. And right away, there's a pop-up window here that says you can take a tour or you can call me. There are some slides in there that are a little shady, and I've kind of noticed the feedback button doesn't work as well. So we're just going to click out of that box and see what the tool has to offer. Okay. First of all, you'll see the map pop up, and you'll see a lot of fires burning. We can scroll around the map. There's the Lahaina fire that just busted out not too long ago, 10 days ago or so. We can zoom on into Nebraska, and we'll see, a fire up here in the, is it Pine Ridge area? But you'll see some shading as well. We can click on any of these counties, and we'll have a little pop-up box that says there's a heat advisory. And don't you know it? Right? 102 today, is that right? Yeah, it's hot, and there's a lot of areas that have that heat advisory. Okay, so I'm going to pop back to my slides just a second here, and we're going to use this tool to answer a couple of questions. We're going to find out, what is the tract that has the lowest number of households with broadband in Douglas County? So let me go back to the tool, and you'll see a lot of layers over here. These are typhoons and hurricanes on the left-hand side, watches and warnings, hurricanes. There's the wildfires and air quality indexes. Up at the top, we'll see a state guide. We're just going to do this pretty easy, quick and dirty, so that you get used to navigating the tool a little bit. We'll go to Nebraska, of course, And then we're going to scroll down and use the county drop down to go to Douglas. Now you can just type in Douglas at the top search bar too. That's fine. So we want Douglas County. So the map's going to zoom in automatically to Douglas County. And you notice here on the side, on the right-hand side, the data changed. Right now we're doing, it's showing data information for Nebraska. And if you look, each panel has a little round circle that can expand that information to bring it forward. And it also has the data tables you can pull up in data.census.gov that explain where these numbers came from. Okay. So here again is your map of Douglas County. And what I wanted to know was a census tract that has the lowest number of households with broadband. Okay. So what we can do is zoom in a little bit to Douglas County, and you'll notice the different colors here. And our response legend here says the predominant categories, 1 to 3 risk factors, are more of an orange color. And what we'll look at is something a little more in the pink color, because those are the most dominant in our risk factors. So we'll see the heat index again, and we'll notice that there is 1 of 3. So the heat index is primary. Okay, we can move over to the second area of concern, which is Census Tract 74,449 in Douglas County. And it has our risk factors of 1.6 being below poverty level. Broadband subscriptions is the one that we wanted to know about. Okay. And then the third table will give us how many persons in this census tract have 3 or more risk factors, 1 to 2 risk factors, or 0 risk factors. The list of risk factors are in a table by topic, and this table will give the difference between the national averages and this particular tract, whether it's lower than national average, higher than national average, or not statistically different than national average. Okay. So we can zoom in and see our tracks a little more clearly. And we're going to use to find out our broadband for Douglas. That's under the social tab at the bottom. It's one of those social characteristics Josie was talking about earlier. So we're going to click on the social characteristics tab at the bottom of the screen, and then we can zoom into this map over on the side and pinpoint. Well, now here we've got a couple that are pretty white. Okay, we've got one that says Census Tract 66.05 has a 66.9% of the household have a broadband subscription. Okay, 66.9. There's another white one over here. Census Tract 7473 has a percentage of 66.7 of the households that have broadband subscription. Okay, now this statistic itself is on the positive side. So if I'm stringing cable or if I want to make sure an area has the access it needs to, say, be informed of emergency messaging coming through. And we want to make sure that it goes not only maybe a hardline cell phone, a hardline or cell phone or internet, we want to make sure that these areas have internet to get that messaging. And it looks as if that track number 74, 73, which we have to subtract it, they have the lowest percentage of persons that don't have internet. And we'll see that that's the Boys Town area. Okay, pretty cool. A lot of other languages spoken at home. This is very important also as far as messaging when you're broadcasting emergency signals as well. So we've got our interactive map. At the bottom, our county profile, economic profile. We were just on social, race and ethnicity, and the business profile as well. Okay, let's try another question. What's the average payroll per person in Lancaster County? So if we follow the directions, we're going to switch the county at the top to Lancaster, and we're going to use the business profile tab at the bottom. What's the average payroll per person in Lancaster County? So again, we'll go back and we're still in Nebraska, and we'll change, and rather than scroll down, Lancaster County. Okay, now we see things have changed a bit. We've got our map on the left. We've got the business profile for Lancaster, Nebraska, and we'll see that the average annual payroll per employee is $51,587. So if you're establishing new businesses, that's pretty important to know how many people can afford your services, right? Okay, and we'll do one more. What's the percentage of people who had income in the past 12 months below poverty level in Scottsbluff County? So again, we're going to change the county to Scottsbluff, and we're going to use the economic profile tab at the bottom. We'll change the county again to Scottsbluff. And we'll use our economic profile tab at the bottom. One thing I want to caution you about is this is households with income below poverty level. 2022, 13.6% of the households. However, over on the left side, in Scottsbluff County, Nebraska, 12% of the people had income in the past 12 months. Okay, so not to confuse individuals with households, because there's usually about 2.4 people per household. Okay, and again, this will also, front and center, this will also give you the data table from accessible through data.census.gov that you can access that piece of information. Any questions so far about My Community Explorer?
We do have a question.
Okay.
Why does total household income stop at 100,000? I think it's 100,000 or more.
100,000 or more. Yes.
100,000 or more. So, right, when they collect that data, people are actually giving, I make $75,252 a year. So they are summarizing into groups, blocks of data that they think are interesting, help tell a story. So that's a fairly standard place to stop it. I know when I do my own surveys, I usually ask the question 100K or more. Maybe we have to adjust for inflation or something like that over time. I think on the detailed income table from the ACS, I'll check it. There might be one other grouping above that. Is there like a 250,000?
Yes, there is one that says over 250, but also to your point that Census Bureau will not, we have strict disclosure avoidance policies and procedures that we have to follow. So no piece of data we release can go back to the person or business that told us that. So we can't say in this county there was one person that made over $250,000, because everybody's going to know who answered that question, right? So yeah, it's a lot to do with data disclosure. That's why this this bureau is so adamant about the quality of the data and the trustworthiness of the data. We're not going to release it if anybody can pinpoint who gave us that information.
I think it's important to point out. So someone went and found the table. Thank you for finding that. So there are some more groups, and they linked it through here. They went from the community resilient, My Community Explorer, into the actual table. So that's really a great tool there. So there will be more data necessarily behind it, but I think in here, right, they're trying to provide you a snapshot to tell a particular story as quickly as possible. And that tool is amazing, right? Because if you have to go into the very specific data, it's hard to jump back and forth. In data.census.gov, well, it's much easier here in My Community Explorer, or contrasting different places really quickly, getting a quick visual. So lots of positives to this platform, this way to access the data, but the data behind some of it is coming from data.census.gov.
Yeah, and it's a good way to start too. It's quick, it's easy, it's a good way to focus. Whoa, I didn't realize that you know, there was such a language barrier in this county. You know, I know it exists, but I didn't realize how prominent it was, or how many of the residents are, say, over 65 that may have mobility issues getting around the community, you know, or we'll hop on over to another tool that I have. It's called community resilience estimates. And that's, of course, the answers to those questions. But community resilience estimates goes into a little more detail about how, what factors may prevent a person from overcoming some of the odds posed by natural disasters. Okay. It was created in response to the pandemic, and we teamed with other agencies to measure capacity of every neighborhood in the nation to bounce back from a natural disaster. So it's very similar, and it has the same kind of look and feel as the My Community Explorer, but it narrows down those risk factors just a little bit more. Use interactive maps. Some of the risk factors involve language and poverty, employment, disabilities, vehicle access. Do you have a way to evacuate? And again, the broadband access as well. So let's ask some more questions and dig into this tool a little bit. So what is a population of Knox County that has 3 or more risk factors, which is kind of the standard, you know. I personally have like 3 risk factors, so I'm okay, but you know, maybe not so much. And then how many households in Sherman County have someone with disabilities, and how many households don't have internet in Morrell County. All right. So we'll start again from our home page. We're going to just hover over data and maps. And then we're going to go to data equity tools. And community resilience estimates is right here on the top of the list. We do have to scroll down just a little bit here to find the interactive tool. Okay, if you notice when it was loading, there's this bar over on the very left-hand side. That has a lot of information about how this tool started. It was in, both of these tools were in response to COVID-19, and how do we communicate with our population, and what do they need from us? And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see those 10 risk factors. And we have our map. We have in our interactive map to begin with, our thematic map that shows the whole country, and the estimated population in a percent that has 3 or more risk factors. The darker the color, of course, the more risk factors, or the more population they have with 3 or more risk factors. The predominant map offering at the bottom of the map has which counties have populations with that, 3 or more is the predominant number of risk factors in that county. And statistical difference, this is the one that shows which counties have higher numbers that are higher than the national averages. Okay, so we'll go back to our our thematic map to begin with to answer our first question. What's a population of Knox County that have 3 or more risk factors? And again, kind of the same look and feel. The tables on the right are population showing for the United States and those risk factors. And up at the top again, we'll select the state. And again, you can just start typing and it'll kind of auto-populate a drop down for you. And county, we're talking about Knox County. Okay. And our question was 3 or more risk factors. Okay. So how many of the population have 3 or more risk factors? Big numbers at the bottom. We've got 30.1% of the population with 3 or more risk factors. If we just click on the county, it'll tell you there are 8,395 persons in Knox County. 30.13% have 3 or more risk factors. That means that 2,529 people have 3 or more risk factors. And then that table pops up again. What are they? What are some of the factors? If you don't like to look at the table, we can go on the right side of the screen and click on that little expand button and blow it up for you along with the tables that this information is coming from. Also, a couple of things: when you blow up that information, you expand that information, we've got the key facts here at the bottom, and then race and ethnicity. So very visual, very picturesque. Tell me about this thing in graphic form here. Health insurance. We've got 241 persons age 35 to 64 that don't have health insurance. Okay. Age and sex, our language. Okay. Not only the big four, but also broken down in a number of ways for you to visualize that a little bit better. Okay. Our next question was, how many households in Sherman County have someone with a disability? So again, we just changed from Knox County over to Sherman. Okay, and it's Sherman again. Again, a map. And we can bring up the side panel on the right. How many households with a disability? 32.2%. Now we can go to this table or some other tables that will break down what kind of disabilities do you have in Knox County or in Sherman County. Are they visually impaired? Do they have troubles with mobility? Are they have hearing difficulties? Things like this. It's best to look, Josie, you had shown a picture of the ACS form, the American Community Survey form, and all these tables come back to ACS information. So it's really a good idea to familiarize yourself with what does the ACS ask. And you can go census.gov, ACS, under the surveys link, and it'll give you a copy of that form. But whatever question is asked there, you're going to find data for here. Okay.
That is one of my favorite tips, and I can't say who told me that, but at some point when I started using census data, I was like, oh, overwhelmed by what could I have? And so looking at the specific questions really helped me to think about not just the topics, right? Because it's not just question by question, but you can cross-tabulate that information. So a question with another question. And that's where you really start to understand the full wealth of things you can have.
Correct.
Someone said, community resilience estimates, is this an idea similar to something called social vulnerability? And
yes.
Yeah, right. And I think people will define those slightly different ways, but we're trying to capture what set of data do we have to help think about a broader concept like social vulnerability. Here they're calling it community resilience, so their ability to come back after a disaster, right? So kind of that is like looking at the good factors, while social vulnerability might be looking at the bad factors, but different ways of getting at a broader concept. And you won't see them defined the same place everywhere. Very few concepts have official sort of, these are the metrics you must use. But most will use metrics from the United States Census Bureau to get an idea like that. And I think that is an important takeaway.
Exactly.
We also had a question in the Q&A about vital stats for population estimates. I answered that online, and we could talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
After Carol's if you want, but otherwise I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I think you get the idea, but we had one more question to ask, and that was about internet connectivity in Morrell County. And that, like I said, is the only statistic that we need to do a little bit of backtracking. So let's see. This is the only stat that we just have to do backwards. You know, this is a positive number. 77.3% do have internet. So if you're online broadcasting information, then 27.7 are not going to get that of the households. Okay. Not just individuals, households. So, All right. So I'm gonna go back to my slides for just a little bit here and kind of wrap up my portion of it. Let's see. Those are our answers, of course. And just wanted to let you know about some of the other things that the Census Bureau has to offer. Many of you may have received an economic census survey on the years ending in 2 and 7. The Census Bureau release or asks for information from 4.2 million businesses. Now, these are not non-employer businesses. These are not, single owner businesses with no employees. These are employer businesses, and it's part of the requirements through Title 13. And I know you can't see this release schedule, but we're just wrapping up the collection period for information from businesses. What were your 2022 numbers? And we've got that information and we're churning it. And by March, some of that information will be forthcoming and out there for you to see. Census Business Builder is a great tool for the business landscape of an area, or for those writing business plans or starting new businesses. You can come here and find out your competition and your average payroll and how many businesses are like yours close to you, etc. Quarterly workforce indicators describes the types of businesses and their employment data. What are the ages of people that work there? What is the revenue? What is how many have you employed? What sectors? What quarters are you looking at? The map might be a useful tool for a lot of you too, especially your population is kind of on 2 states, sort of. People live in Iowa and commute to Nebraska to work, or vice versa. They live in Nebraska and commute to Iowa to work. That's a handy tool for that. Very, very helpful to see where your workforce is coming from, going to. On the map for emergency management, these are declared federal disasters or emergencies. You can see that the Pine Ridge fire is on here, and you can click on it. Well, right now there's no data, but you can go to the map on the map and find out the population and the languages and the disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. The income levels for those residents in that area, who's affected. This is pretty new. We started our second phase of a stat adventure. And we are asking people to help us provide ways that we can provide supply chain data to the world. So we're asking for your input, your ideas, your plans, your creativity to help us use our data to, how can we make it in a tool like some of those that you've seen today that can make it easy for people to find what they're looking for. As far as this one here is supply chain data, but there's our innovation lab is really open to a lot of suggestions. So if you've got something on your mind, let us know about it. The 2022 Census of Governments is released today. So I had a conversation with a woman up in Madison County on my trip this spring. And she was burdened with the Census of Governments. And it's like, okay, we've got data for you now. This is fruition of your chores. All right, so that and many, many, many more are there for the taking. So let's open the field up a little bit. Any questions about what we've got?
We had two just come in. The previous map showing natural disasters, they said there was snowfall in the Gulf of Mexico. Is that a different year or is that current? Oh, it does look like a snowflake. But
Winter weather.
so if you look at the legend and map, it's showing probably different events, and you would have to probably filter into what's going on right now.
You can click on any of these. I mean,
yeah.
I can go live and show it to you. And click on anything, but it's got the Lahaina fire, so it's not that terribly old. What it may mean is that the water in the Gulf is relatively colder, creating some of these hurricane type, I mean, it may be the Atlantic is warming up. So maybe some of that colder Atlantic water is coming into the Gulf.
We had a great question from Derek. How can I follow up, or who can I reach out to if I have more questions when using these tools? And I think we have lots of ways. Us, right?
One of us, yes.
Right. Yeah. So like a little bit about the Census Bureau hierarchy, maybe, right? So there's the Census Bureau, and there's lots of people working to run the surveys, do the statistical estimates, build the crazy, systems behind the releases of all these data, right? So there's lots of those folks. Then there's folks like Carol. And you just a little bit about what your job is.
Okay, there are more than 15,000 people that work for the Census Bureau. We've got a call center in Tucson, Arizona. We've got the National Processing Center that receives all the ACS forms and, sends out all kinds of paper products, that processes a lot of our information coming in. And we've got headquarters people. There's about 5,000 that work in headquarters. And then there's field representatives all over the place that the door knockers, okay, that work to help gather statistics for us. And my job in particular is to do things like this, to help you find what you're looking for. How can we service you better? You can call me my branch, my data dissemination and training branch is just that. We try and get the information out to you in some way, shape, or form, either by phone call or email or these presentations, or from Census Academy that has recorded webinars and data gems. Data gems are like 5-minute tutorials that, how can I get this one tidbit of information? You can go to Census Academy and look for the little 5-minute segment. You don't have to sit through an hour presentation to fully understand. I just want this piece. Or pick up the phone, give Ask Data a call, write an email to Ask Data. Tons of ways that you can reach out to us to help you find what you're looking for.
So, and then our role here, so Census Bureau is putting all of this out. We are not involved with the collection of other data. We helped out here in Nebraska during 2020 census outreach and things like that. We're sort of a contact here in the state. The Census Bureau does not pay
Valuable
us.
contact.
Thank you. Right. But they need some way to sometimes exchange information. And truly back in the day, that we were the conduit for exchanging information, right? You needed floppy disks. So they would send the data to us on floppy disks. That's not true anymore, right? It is so available through all of these different access systems that they are creating to help people find data quickly. However, it could still be overwhelming. There are always still questions about why I should use this versus that. And so our role in the state is nothing specific other than to say, we care about census data. We think it's useful. We think it has value. We apply it in our work, right? CPAR has this other side where we're taking grants and contracts. We're conducting original research. We're also trying to make sure people don't conduct original research for questions that have already been answered by the Census Bureau. So we're just staying in touch. I go to census.gov Academy. I watch Data Gems video. I took a micro data class. I went to the conference to hear about updates, to find presenters for this conference. This isn't all about census data, but it's a big chunk of what we do here.
Right,
and so
right.
making sure that's really available.
And I love the creative ways that you take the data available to you and apply it to exactly what your customers
We're getting questions
are asking
from
for
state
you.
senators. We're getting
Mhm.
questions from cities. We're getting questions from counties. All sorts of different things that come
Right.
up. You can always email us at unocpar@unomaha.edu. Most people email census data requests. I take probably a really different tack than some, right? I try to set, here's the link, here's the data, here's how I would do it. But sometimes there are different ways, right? So Carol, you showed a lot of ways to access American Community Survey data in a slightly easier format than data.census.gov, right? Because it's sort of giving it to you, it's allowing you to compare and contrast pretty quickly. Some of the
data.census.gov has really come a long way in being user friendly. We kind of geared it toward like a Google search. I don't know how long your audience has been with the Census Bureau or knows about census data, but we used to have American Fact Finder, and that was kind of a skilled tool.
Right.
Data.census.gov has come to be a little more user friendly, and you can play around with it for a long time, tweaking different. Do I look for the year first? Do I look for the geography first? Do I look for the survey first? That kind of thing. So you or I
might demo the maps tool, which has gotten a lot better over time too. But I will tell you, data.census.gov is like changing actively. So between yesterday and today, I was looking at something for this presentation last night, and today it's a little bit different. It's usually better, and you can usually still get to it, but like it's actively changing, and so that's a time too where you can contact us because we're usually looking at it daily as well.
One thing I like though too, I want to point out though that if you use a tool like QuickFacts or something, that's not reproducible. I can't go into QuickFacts 6 months from now and pull that same table. QuickFacts is a really good snapshot picture of what data point can I research more. Data.census.gov, I can pull a table that was there 5 years ago and use it in comparison to what's going on now.
Right.
The data is always being updated, and new ways to get it through data.census.gov, but you can reproduce it. You can cite it in a paper, in a business plan, for example.
Absolutely. And Derek, I'll also say that part 3 that we're offering this year is sort of gauged towards that too. We have people that want to use census data and actually, right, they want to use census data, or maybe they're not using census data and we've told them now that census data is a great resource, but right, newer users need a little bit more practice, have a couple questions. Part 3 would be a great place to like hang out with us a little bit. But most census data requests we do for free. You really just email us, and like I said, if it's a standard table, I'm going to email it back for you. There are like choices I might have to make. So I'm trying to think back to some of my examples, but like what is Western Nebraska? If you ask me what is Western Nebraska, it's not a defined Census Bureau region. So I might send it to you by county and say, add up for your counties, or here's the public use micro data area, PUMA, for that region. Is that useful to you, right? So there might be choices. It might not be exactly what you want, but usually I can get you thinking about it in a different way. So that might be a good place for that.
If you could possibly take a moment and just fill out that the questionnaire, it's only like 3 or 4 questions or whatnot, but I would appreciate your feedback. Also, I wanted to let you know too that there are maps that you can use in data.census.gov that you can kind of draw your own boundaries, like the Western Nebraska question was, well, if I click on this county, I can include this area or this tract and this tract and this tract and this tract. And I've created my own little statistical geography.
Absolutely. And that I might demo a little bit of that in the next question. So is there a way to use the tools to identify which counties are growing smaller successfully, i.e. which counties are losing population, but it's not as bad as other ones? And that's kind of a very Nebraska story, right? We are looking at change over time. And while the state as a whole is growing, we've had many counties lose population in the last decade using 2020 census data. And then you might want to look at 2021 to 2022. I did the percent change recently for that from the population estimates program. So, right, looking at change over time with these resources. And yes, right, all of these resources have a component of looking at change over time. What I will say is very likely you might have to do a little adding, subtracting, a percent change or things like that. Because a lot of the data comes out fairly statically, like within a year, right? A cross section of data is the statistical term for it. It's not longitudinal. You might have to get the data for 1 year and then get the data for the next year and then look at it. But there's a couple resources that would make it easier. We publish a lot of those stats on our website. So we just did the population estimates percent change by county. So we have it. And then if you want to look at over the decades, we've put some of that data out on our websites. So there are resources from us. You can always ask, we can calculate. But I'll show you some of what the Census Bureau does to make it a little bit easier. So this is our website. And I did just want to show, I mentioned this dashboard. So for instance, here we've done total population by county. And we go back to 2012 because this is ACS data and that's fairly consistent. So, right, you could download this data for 2012, then switch to 2021 and do the percent change by county and find out, right, which counties had the most population loss, which had the smallest. Let's say you want to see it year by year, you could do it that way. It's a little bit of work, but I would also say in that context, you might want to just ask us. We might have that. We do have that. So, and we also have a 2020 census page that is set up fairly similar to see the decennial census population. But this also gives lots of other data points, right? When we're pulling from the Census Bureau, sometimes people just I need the percent of the population in poverty, right? You don't need deep analysis, you just need that number. So there's lots of ways to just grab that number. This is the Census Bureau maps. Now I'm kind of in it a weird way because I wanted to show you the PUMAs, the regions. And right, these are statistical geographies. They made them up for a reason that makes sense statistically. They're not known to us. But out in central and western Nebraska, where population counts are small, to get more detailed data, you may have to use these, and they make a little bit of sense to regions as we might understand them. But so for instance, a lot of times I use the advanced search because I know what I want. So I can come in and pick, like I said, for the decennial census, I think it's better to come in and get the survey. Because if you're looking for certain topics, it's really not in the decennial census. They don't offer that level of detail. So I find it a little easier there, but you could also go in a different way. But you could come into the decennial census. Again, I'm going to use that because I know it's just going to give me my total population counts. And then I might go over to map. And so now I could see, so this is going to have 2010 and 2020. I might add in. So you were looking at counties. So now here's counties in Nebraska. And then I can look at, well, it's not really loading. I don't like how I did that. Hold on. I'm going to go to tables. I'm going to choose my geos here. County, Nebraska, all counties within Nebraska. And then I'm going to switch over to my map. This should color it blue. Okay. Anyway, so from here, we could download data like that, but it's not going to offer you a percent change. You're going to have to download the data and analyze it in some way to do that. I do think some of the Census Bureau visualizations offer some percent change. There's a link on my page about decennial census that's going to offer some percent change information as well. So, you know, multiple ways to get to any data point from the Census Bureau. It's a wonderful thing they do, but it can be really overwhelming. Should I go here versus here? But there are lots of ways to look at change over time and a lot of different resources for change over time. I will say also population estimates, that other program in the middle that is statistical, they usually release change over time in some of the Excel files. It depends on which one you download, but they can be in there. Okay, the mapping feature is always changing. It has gotten a lot better, and there are these selection tools to look at regions. And right, a data point on its own is interesting, but a data point in comparison, in contrast, either over time or in relation to some other area, that's what usually adds the level of detail. We have one more question. Is there an easy way to identify tracts into the region? So this is another one. I would go to the map, choose census tracts as your layer, and just see where the census tracts are. Again, they're numbered, they're 73.2 and things like that. So they're not going to make sense to people on their own. You probably will have to map tracts. Carol, thank you so much.
Thank you.